So I hope you're ready to learn about one of the most important conservation initiatives in Florida, the Florida Wildlife Corridor, an 18 million acre network that safeguards biodiversity and ensures a sustainable future for wild Florida. And I'm delighted that with us tonight is Jason Lauritsen, the Chief Conservation Officer of Florida Wildlife Corridor Foundation, who, along with his colleagues, are tasked with staving off the biggest threats facing habitat connectivity in the state as they work to connect wildlife from Georgia and Alabama to the Florida Keys by protecting and restoring essential conservation habitat throughout our state. Jason, whose expertise includes environmental conservation and restoration, land management science, wetland protection, and woodstock recovery in the Western Everglades, is an experienced speaker, educator, and writer who has authored numerous papers, publications, and presentations throughout his more than 20-year career in conservation and natural resources management, which includes his time as sanctuary director at the crown jewel of Audubon, Florida's sanctuary network, Corkscrew Swamp, before he joined the Corridor Foundation in 2019. He has described his tireless work to build a corridor as our best chance to preserve the wonderful wild places and biodiversity that Floridians have been stewarding for centuries. So please join me in waking Jason Lauritsen to tell us about the momentous achievements and continuing efforts of connecting the Florida corridor, the best chance of saving our natural history legacy. Jason, when you are ready, you can share your screen and begin. Please remember, everyone, to keep yourselves muted and your video screens turned off, and get ready for an exciting presentation.
Okay. Let me know you can hear me.
Jason, you sound great.
Okay, fantastic. Scott, thanks. That was a great meeting. I love the visuals, and what an enviable list of field trips you guys have planned. That's going to be a fantastic year ahead. So, exciting. Wish I lived a little closer to you all. I want to first start off just by saying thank you to everybody for showing up, and also for the work that you do. I know that Audubon chapters are incredibly important in just digging into what's going on in their communities, in the backyards, in the regions, in the state, and that civic engagement, that effort on conservation, really is what makes this whole thing work. And just keep it up. I'm encouraged to see this group to get together. I have on the screen here a invitation to a Corridor Connect. It is our third statewide summit, and we're holding that on June 3rd through 5th. And if you'd like to find out more today, you can just check that QR code out, and we'd be happy to give you information about that. And I'm going to give you a talk that's going to cover a variety of different topics, tell a few stories, and it really is about the work not just that the Florida Wildlife Corridor Foundation does, but the work that's been going on in Florida for over a century with people all over the state that are passionate, committed, and knowledgeable about their backyards and the conservation work that needs to get done. So here's just a brief outline. My contact information there is in the lower left, and that photo is a shot taken at Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. Those are my two kids. They're now seniors or juniors and sophomores in high school, getting ready for their exams, and so they grow up fast. That's one of the reasons why I do this, is to make sure that there are still places to take your shoes off and splash around in the swamps. Floridians have been identifying, purchasing, stewarding, visiting wild places in Florida for over a century. And we have such a diversity of wildlife and wild places that people have taken notice, and it's a part of our identity. One of the things that is often missed here is the fact that the linkages and connections from the different places throughout the state are hidden unless you really pay attention. And if you've ever come across the book by Aldo Leopold, Sand County Almanac, he gives a warning in that opening chapter saying there are two spiritual dangers in not owning a farm. The first is that you come to think that your food, your breakfast, comes from the grocery store. And the second, that your heat comes from the furnace. And he spends the balance of that book really talking about the dangers of making decisions without having a full understanding of the natural areas around us. And that despite our best intentions, we can do something that undermines our quality of life and what values we get from wild places. So what I want to share a little bit is starting off with some history and giving some perspective from where we've come from and where we have yet to go. In 1847, the U.S. Treasury Secretary commissioned a guy named Buckingham Smith to go out and do a reconnaissance in the Everglades and to answer two questions. Can we drain the Everglades? And if we can, should we? Buckingham Smith did his due diligence. He interviewed people on the ground, engineers. He came and visited the Everglades, and he spent months exploring it. He was the first person that I'd read that had written about the connection between the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas River of grass and the Atsinahufa, the big cypress forests over in the Western Everglades. And knowing how the story ends up, I was surprised to come across this passage on the screen. The appearance of the interior of the Everglades is unlike that of any region which I have ever heard, and certainly it is in some respects the most remarkable on this continent. The profound and wild solitude of the place, the solemn silence that pervades it, add to awakened and excited curiosity feelings bordering on awe. Now, I was surprised to hear this soaring rhetoric, knowing that we did in fact drain the Everglades, make our best attempt to do that. But here was Buckingham Smith's approach to the beauty of it, and it seemed like maybe, as I'm flipping through the pages of his report back to Congress, maybe he's going to surprise me. But a few pages later, you see this sentence pop out: "But the practical man," and his tone changes, and he looks at this beauty as one thing, but the reality is, to Buckingham Smith, the Everglades are now suitable only for the haunt of noxious vermin or the resort of pestilent reptiles. The statesman whose exertions shall cause the millions of acres they contain, now worse than worthless, to teem with products of agricultural industry, to be changed into a garden in which can be reared many and various exotics. That man will merit a high place in public favor, not only with his own generation, but with posterity. Now, obviously, we disagree with the outcome of that, and it wasn't too long after that we decided that we needed to save some of these places. And in 1916, the very first piece of property within the Florida Wildlife Corridor was conserved. It was the Royal Palm State Park. 960 acres were the first effort there to conserve wild places in Florida. And a few decades later, the Everglades National Park became a thing. And in 1994, the Everglades Forever Act was launched, and we've been working on saving this wonderful place for a long period of time. So our valuing of wild places changes over time. Our recognition of beauty and scarcity can change. And I would argue that history would nudge us towards much longer planning horizons, and also intellectual humility, because sometimes the things that you do take a long time to undo. And that appreciation of the aesthetics of the Everglades, of wild Florida, of wildlife, doesn't do justice to really loving it, really knowing it, and being able to have an impact on keeping it around. One of my favorite quotes is by Leonardo da Vinci. It goes, "One has no right to love or hate that which one does not first adequately understand. Great love springs from great knowledge of the beloved object, and if one knows it but little, one can love it but little, if at all." So we can appreciate the aesthetics, and that's one way to get other people that aren't already on board involved. But we need to invest in science, and we need to have a deeper understanding that's based on a real knowledge of the wildlife that we care about, or that we say we care about. And one of my favorite stories, a pivotal moment for me, really began, I think, 8 years ago, in late March, when a woman from Wisconsin was walking the boardwalk at Corkscrew, and one of the volunteers encountered her and told her that she ought to be careful because he had seen a panther on the boardwalk, and he cautioned her to take the shortcut around the boardwalk rather than go the long way, because she would perhaps run into this cat. Now, this woman did probably what most of us here today would do. She got her iPhone out and she turned the camera on, and she's walking around the boardwalk. And I'm guessing many of you have seen this video. She catches an image of a panther coming around the corner of the boardwalk, walking towards her. And if you've not been on Corkscrew's boardwalk, it's about 5 feet wide, and this panther's walking towards her. It doesn't slow down. In fact, it sees her, it appears to get nervous, and it speeds up. And you're watching her film this, and it only takes a few seconds, but you can see the cat glance to the left and to the right, sees the railings, sees the woman, and just makes a break for it. And you can hear the claws come out and try to grab hold on the hard boardwalk, and it races past her, and somehow she manages to keep her iPhone trained on the cat as it runs past her on the boardwalk. She lets out an expletive, which of course we can probably all relate to as well. And then she shares the video, and it goes viral. And again, this is late March. And by a week later, there were 2 or 3 million views. People were talking about this. There were reports on the news. And April and May can be very slow months at Corkscrew on the boardwalk. But this woman's video had inspired a state and even people from out of state to make a trip. And they started to come. And it was the busiest April and May Corkscrew had ever had, because of this one sighting and the enthusiasm of this panther. And to me, that speaks to how we value Florida panthers and how we identify with wildness in the state, and just the idea that it mattered enough to people to just possibly, maybe, encounter a Florida panther in the wild. That mattered to them enough to drive across the state, to pay for the gas, to pay for meals, possibly to stay overnight in hotels, and to spend precious time possibly looking for a Florida panther. And as the director at the time, I talked to a lot of visitors on the boardwalk, and was taking in the excitement and enthusiasm that came with this viral video. And many of the visitors that were there were talking about it. And they were asking staff, did you see one? They were looking on the sightings board. They were asking guests as they came off the boardwalk. And I inquired of many of them what their thoughts were. And they all expressed gratitude that Audubon had been protecting Corkscrew Swamp. They were grateful that it was there. And I got the feeling that they thought these cats were safe at Corkscrew. And so I started to pry with my questions a little bit, asking how many panthers do you think you can safely keep here at Corkscrew? How many panthers could it take care of? And I explained to them, the boardwalk is 2.25 miles. The sanctuary is about 20 square miles, 13,000 acres. And I would always get back numbers that the least of which were 2 or 3 panthers. Some people guessed as many as 20 panthers could be here at Corkscrew. There's a real disconnect between their value and appreciation and the reality of what it takes for a Florida panther to survive. And the reality is that an adult male panther has a home range somewhere between 200 and 250 square miles. Corkscrew's 20 square miles. You need at least 10 Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuaries to satisfy the home range needs of one male panther. So if we're going to save the species that we love, that we identify with, we need to work across borders, we need to work across fence lines, and we need to work in the working landscape as well as in the conservation landscape. So that was a pivotal moment for me, just in recognizing the magnitude of the challenge, to bring people from an affection for to a knowledge of conservation and what it's going to take. Another encounter and another storyline that I think has a lot of traction for helping to tell the story of a connected landscape is this black bear, which was part of Joe Guthrie's research project in the Avon Park Air Force Range area of the state. He had tagged and collared a bear that was male bear number 34. It was a young bear, about 2 years old, and he put this GPS collar on it, and he watched this bear, watched the data come in, and noticed that the first several months it really didn't move anywhere from its natal grounds. And then it went on this walkabout, traveling over 500 miles in the course of 2 months. It was just a remarkable journey. He went from where you see that red dot all the way up to I-4. And for about 4 days bounced around right against I-4. And the assumption here is that if it could have continued going north, it would have continued to want to go north, bouncing against I-4, eventually giving up, turning it back south, and going all the way to the western edge of Lake Okeechobee and spending a little time there before its collar finally fell off. But this black bear traveling that distance represented a package of valuable genetic material that could have taken it from the Highlands Glades black bear population in central South Florida up to the Nature Coast, where the bear population is incredibly small and the genetics were starting to be bottlenecked. So this is a story of a missed opportunity because of a lack of continuity in the landscape. The impermeability of I-4 was a barrier that really separates the state. So this was another call for us to take notice, and we get to see that because we get into the science. And what we know is that networks of connected and protected areas are inherently more resilient than individual isolated patches. Most of us have our favorite patch of wild Florida, the place that we go to bird, to hike, to camp, to look at the dark sky. And we have these favorite spots, but we don't necessarily pay enough attention, most of us, to how it's connected to other great, valuable patches within the landscape. So that connectivity can be difficult to see and understand and to make decisions on. What the Florida Wildlife Corridor has recognized, what the foundation has recognized is that there's a value to people, wildlife, and habitat to having these connected landscapes. And for people, the corridor represents 114,000 jobs. It provides $30 billion worth of annual revenue. From a wildlife perspective, the Wildlife Corridor is home to over 1,700 species, and at least 60 of these are considered at risk. And as far as the habitat goes, and I'll get a little bit more into this as we go on, there are 75 state parks, 32 state forests, 171 first and second magnitude springs, dozens and dozens and dozens of hundreds of local county parks and municipality parks that make up this Florida Wildlife Corridor, paddling trails, hiking trails, and it's quite a diverse environment. And so part of our role, our collective role and goal, is to work towards this diverse, resilient Florida by connecting to all three of these areas: the people, the working landscape, the economic value of the corridor, recognizing that one Florida panther sighting that drove all of that ecotourism had a benefit, had a financial benefit to the county, to Naples, to Corkscrew, and to Audubon, and those kinds of things are things that matter. Now, I would imagine everybody here that's listening to this presentation would think bears, bees, and butterflies are all valuable for their own sakes, but there are a lot of folks that aren't going to be motivated to work on conservation until they see some of these other returns coming in. Of course, remarkable wildlife in our state: black bears, zebra longwing butterflies, and incredible habitats as well. Some of these photos Carlton Ward has taken are just stunning. And as Scott mentioned at the top, it's an 18 million acre footprint. And this footprint represents our best opportunity to safeguard a biodiverse and sustainable wild Florida for future generations. And this watercolor map actually is a piece of art that helps us to tell the story. And we can take this around, and people are not going to look at this map and say, "Hey, that's my ranch. Why is it in this boundary?" It's a art can be a soft way to introduce a topic and to start to build relationships and to cultivate interest and understanding. And thanks to photography and artists and storytellers, um, Florida has really made some great gains at embracing this idea of a statewide framework for conservation that we can all invest in. And thanks to that, thanks to the storytelling, thanks to the imagery, thanks to the photography, in 2021, Florida passed the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act. And this act is not a regulatory act. It is an incentive. It recognizes the value, the ecological value, the financial value, the quality of life value of a protected landscape like this, and it provides incentives for the conservation of it. And it directs state agencies to look for ways to help this ambitious conservation effort materialize. And you can see here that in this map, there'll be some other maps that I'll share in a moment. There are areas that are already conserved. There are areas that are in light green that are opportunity areas not yet conserved. And then those other two colors show Florida Forever and Rural and Family Land projects that are in place along the corridor as well. So there's opportunities for us to gain it. There are people already raising their hands saying, "I'd like to participate in conservation." And every year we have funding, we have a chance to save some of the corridor. And every year also we're growing, we lose some of it. There are communities and roads and conversion of habitat. So we're going to lose some, we're going to save some, and we need to continue to figure out how to increase the amount that we lose and reduce the amount we save, or I should say, increase the amount we save and reduce the amount we lose. But it's not just about acres. Conserving the corridors like a game of Jenga. And if you've never played Jenga, you got 54 blocks of wood stacked on top of each other, and you have to pull a block of wood out and stack it on top, and you lose the game if the tower falls over. You can lose a game of Jenga in 2 moves if you're not paying attention. In a similar way, with the Florida Wildlife Corridor, if we're not careful which acres we lose, it doesn't take much to sever a connection, to have a fragmenting event, and to turn what was a connected corridor into an ecological cul-de-sac where wildlife can no longer communicate across the landscape. So that's really the goal here, is for us to get to know our backyard, to start to better understand where those vulnerabilities are, where the opportunities are, and look at our limited resources and see where do we need to deploy these. This is one of the most common and simplest maps that depicts the corridor in 2 buckets. Areas that are conserved, we have 10 million acres. That's fantastic. Florida is a leader nationwide in acquiring lands for conservation. I mean, really done a fantastic job. And those patches might never be converted into something else, but it doesn't mean they're going to continue to support biodiversity in the way it does now, unless we can protect the connections that link them to other special places. And that's where the opportunity areas come in. Those lighter green areas on the map, those represent areas of ecological value and critical functional connection to one another. And if those are lost, then we will over time have patches degraded. Even though we've saved them, they will degrade. And I want to make sure that I mention the legacy of science that's gone into this, the individuals and the tools and the modeling. The Florida Wildlife Corridor boundary is a product of the Florida Ecological Greenways Network model. Tom Hochter and a technical advisory group first created the FEGN model in the 1990s. And every few years, they'll revisit it, redo the data, add new layers of data as we come across them. recognizing places that we've lost to land conversion and places that we conserve thanks to conservation acquisitions. They'll rerun the model and the boundaries of the corridor will change. And this, as you can see on the slide, there were set 26 priority ecological data layers. Panther habitat, longleaf pine habitat, aquifer recharge areas, springs. There are 7 connectivity models: the panther least cost pathways, black bear least cost pathways, riparian areas. And these things help us to define what the corridor looks like. And it looks an awful lot like what Larry Harris and Reed Noss conceived of back in the 80s. There have been scientists working on ecology and connectivity and landscape conservation for a long time. So I don't want you to get the idea that the Florida Wildlife Corridor Foundation were the authors of the science behind this, because we're not. We're part of a community that's trying to save the same thing, but it's based on science and our understanding of these ecosystems. Just a few quotes from technical papers that I thought were worth sharing. That last one: if your habitat patch size decreases, connectivity to the remaining patches becomes more important. If you have a small conservation area, it had better be connected to the other ones, and it better be well connected to neighboring ones, or it's going to, over time, degrade and you'll lose species. They'll blink out. They won't be able to recover from ecological events like hurricanes and fires. We have 75 state parks in the corridor. There are 175 state parks in the state. What that tells you is there are 100 parks that no longer have the benefit of connectivity to the rest of the corridor. There are 100 state parks that we've purchased, identified for their value, continue to steward, that no longer have a meaningful connection. There are 75 parks that still do. We have to do what we can to make sure that these still remain connected in this landscape. And I'll tell you a little bit about our organization. I won't spend a terrible amount of time on this part, but we have the sole mission of championing a collaborative campaign to permanently connect, protect, and restore the Florida Wildlife Corridor. We work with people who are doing conservation. We work with agencies. We have a very big tent and a very big table. We work with developers to try to help them understand what it means to avoid impacts to the corridor and recognize and retain functional connections. We're going to continue to grow in the state, and it really matters how we do it. So we work with a lot of groups, and you may know us. Maybe the first time you've heard about us was because you saw one of our expedition films. Sharing what Florida has began really with 2 really long 1,000-mile treks across Florida, with some films that were produced from those. And we've done several expedition films since then. Our last one that was published is the O2O film, which was up in Northeast Florida. And that one is available. If you want to go to our website, you can watch that. It's, I think, a 23-minute film connecting the Ocala National Forest to the Osceola National Forest. And we just finished filming and doing the final bits of post-production wrap-up on what is going to be our new corridor film that was filmed in Southwest Florida. And that was called the Strand to Slough Expedition. The film itself is going to have a different name. We did do a sneak peek for an audience just recently, but I hope you'll get a chance to see that. It's going to be a phenomenal film. And again, sharing the landscape. One of the things we want to share and highlight are those areas that are most vulnerable to conversion, areas that are narrow and vulnerable to fragmentation. So what the Corridor Foundation has done is we've worked with our partners to identify some places that have exceptional vulnerability and urgency. Some of these places have no alternative. If the link is lost, there's not an alternative connection that is within view. And so we consider those places irreplaceable. And we look at for these places around the state, and we try to direct attention and efforts to that. And we, again, as I said before, we work with just about everybody. One of the things we do is we lean over the maps and we talk about options and solutions, and we network, all in an effort, again, to guide how we grow. There's an urgency to it, giving as many people as there are moving to our state. Thousand Friends of Florida, FDACS, and the University of Florida's Geoplan Center did this great report called the 2070 Project, and they show that you can still fit 33 million people in our state by 2070 if you mind where you put them, and if you're intentional about avoiding the impacts to the corridor. Having dense developments in certain places, preserving other places, looking at the working lands and working landscape. 80%, roughly 80% of the opportunity area within the corridor is in a working lands condition. Most of it is in cattle or silviculture. It's either ranch land or it's forest, and there's quite a few groves as well. And you've probably heard the news about the citrus industry having some trouble hanging on. So there's a focus right now on rapid conversion of citrus, which is going to have a significant impact on fragmentation across the Lake Wells Ridge going up US 27 in the middle of the state. So we look at this, we look at the map, and we try to track what's being converted in the highest pressure, what's the highest conversion risk, and what are the areas that are the most ecologically valuable. And a study by McKinsey in 2021 that we had done broke this data up into 3 horizons, and there are 900,000 acres in Horizon 1. That includes everything that's projected to be lost by 2030, which is 500,000 acres, and then another 400,000 acres that's projected to be lost by 2050, but happens to be in the highest priority for conservation, and that's represented here in red. If you really zoomed into this map, you'd see that there are little red dots all over, and this helps us to inform where those areas that are vulnerable. And when you combine the urgency of conversion with the vulnerability of the geometry, like this very narrow area up here in Marion County, just north of Denellen, there are some areas that the width of the corridor is 1/4 of a mile, and one small project could sever that link. So there are places where there's a significant amount of vulnerability due to the geometry. Other places like this block between two sections of the Withlacoochee State Forest, this is an area that's platted for an estate-style development, and conserving that's going to be very difficult. So working with land trusts and the state foresters and the local governments to try to figure out a plan to conserve this is one of our goals. And we do that in order to, again, try to avoid losing connections. Here you can see an arrow on the left that's marked by the letter G, and then one a little further south marked by the letter H. When this Florida Ecological Greenways Network model of the corridor was produced, it was done with data that was right around 2019, 2020. The model came out in 2021, again, using the best available data. And by 2022, when I came to ground truth these 3 areas, what I found was that of the 3 connections across the Lake Wells Ridge and US 27, this area that would connect the Green Swamp to the headwaters of the Everglades, of these 3 options that were viable in 2019 when the data was collected to 2022, only one of them remained viable. Only the top one, the corridor in G, which goes through Reedy Creek and the Disney properties to the Disney Wilderness Preserve, that's the only one that's remaining viable. The other 2 have blinked out. And that H corridor, that's a Davenport connection, is one that was the last one to disappear. And I share this as a cautionary tale. When you were on the ground in 2022 looking at these properties, there were several orange groves that were fallow. They weren't in production anymore, and they were surrounded by some developments here and there. You wouldn't have known standing on the ground that those were valuable Florida Wildlife Corridor properties. Unless you get up and take a look at the map and the model, you wouldn't have seen that this was actually a connection across the ridge in this rapidly urbanizing area. You wouldn't have known that there was value for wildlife connectivity here. So providing the model, sharing the knowledge, helping people to understand where places where rapid conversion is happening is really important. The amount of development that happened between 2019 and 2024 was remarkably fast in the Davenport area, and the connection's gone. So we continue now today to try to find ways to close that gap, to figure an alternative for that. This happens to be not too far east of where the wildlife crossing was built under I-4 in the Hilochi Wildlife Management Area. A tremendous effort, took 20 years of planning in the making before the project was finally realized. And in the interim period, some of the connections were lost. So we hold these workshops around the state called Mind the Gaps workshops, where we get people together, the county planners, the municipalities, the land trusts, the Forest Service, the Park Service, people involved with Florida Forever and the Rural and Family Lands Program, consulting firms, landowners, and we go over the gaps in the corridor that we know are vulnerable, urgent, and in some cases irreplaceable. And we have conversations about what we can do. Who can we call? Who can we contact? Where's their funding? What conservation levers can we pull up? And we introduce the people to tools, to models that they can apply to help them understand how to guide and direct growth for their communities. So these planners, the local planners, have what they need to continue. And so that Mind the Gaps effort, the next one that we have is coming up in our summit. It's going to be on June 3rd, that first day of our summit. We're going to do one in this area we call the last green thread, focusing on that connection from the green swamp to the northern Everglades. And the goal here is that we can keep our state connected in meaningful ways so that it's resilient, so that we can continue to nurture our biodiversity and maintain the ecological integrity that we value, that we want to pass on to our kids, because we're growing fast and the pace of conservation has got to quicken if we're going to keep up with development. And it's going to require help, collaboration, commitment, and we need to work together. So I'm just about wrapping up. Just want to let you guys know, if you don't follow us on social media, here's a way to connect to us. Just leave that up there for a second. And then my last slide is going to be that same one to get you to the summit in June if you'd like to. And I don't know, Scott, if I talked too long and ran out of time for questions, but
No, Jason,
I
there's plenty of time for questions. You've done
fantastic.
brilliantly.
Great. I will stop the slideshow then.
Okay, I'm going to give a moment for people to put their questions in. I did love the first question, and it was answered, I guess, by one of your colleagues.
All right, look at that. I've got some colleagues answering questions in the chat. That's fantastic.
Let me find it. For example, hang on. It should be here. Where is it? Anyway, it was from a teacher who asked about where can I purchase a corridor map to hang in my classroom? And so it was answered by both Ethan Coyle. We have a stylized Florida wildlife corridor map in the collaboration with Latour Studio, if you're interested. And then I think Kristen also responded as well. So, but that's exciting that the teacher to put this map in their classroom to begin educating the next generation. I was really excited to hear that, particularly as a former teacher. So let me look at some other questions. So what do we do? This is from Sabine Prather. What do we do to mitigate the reaction to the recent deaths of an elderly man and his dog by a bear in the area? 3 bears have already been killed.
Yeah. Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, that's there's I think it's important to acknowledge the loss of life in a circumstance like that. There are ways to be bear friendly in our communities, and it's important that we can get that bear friendly approach out there and embraced, so that so that these kinds of encounters don't happen. The Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission has materials that you can access to have bear-proof trash cans, to guidance on what to do with your pet food and those sorts of things. I mean, this is an unheard of event to happen in Florida. So I would say let's genuinely lend our sympathy to those affected by that loss, and let's just encourage people to recognize that we share these spaces with wildlife, and we need to be responsible neighbors. We need to recognize that the growth of communities is displacing wildlife. One of the realities about the Florida Wildlife Corridor, some people that are hearing about it for the first time have misconceptions that we're advocating for creating wildlife pathways where there are none, and worried about us routing wildlife into their neighborhoods. And the opposite really is true. What the Florida Wildlife Corridor is doing is it's recognizing the existing corridors and pathways that the wildlife is using, and is trying to prevent disruptions that would send a bear that otherwise would have gone across a field or a pasture, and would now, because of a road or a community, sends them into a place where there are people. And so that's part of the response to these kinds of things, is to provide people with information, but also compassion, and let them know that unless we can plan and grow in ways that accommodate wildlife and their habitats, we're going to end up having more of these kinds of events.
So education, you're saying, is incredibly important in terms of the public realizing that, you know, these wild places have wild animals, and to educate them on how to live with, not against, these wild animals.
Well said, Scott. Yeah.
So next, this is more of a comment that I think than a question. This is from Lena Stemi, who says, building up, not out, and reusing dilapidated buildings to offset some of the demands of incoming population. Another question. This is Brad Cornell from Audubon, Florida. Hi, Jason.
Hey, Brad.
A great information perspective on connections. What is the status of the legislative appropriations for corridor acquisitions 2 years ago, 020, and Big Cypress to Caloosahatchee corridor? Does FWCF do acquisitions itself?
Okay, that's great. Yeah. So, Brad, I should probably pull that up. There was a lot in there. Currently, I've got concerns that we're not going to maintain the same level of funding this legislative session as we had last year. Since 2021, it's been going up, and this year's been tough. Funding is really tough, and one of the things that I've seen growth in is counties adopting referendums for their own land acquisition capacity. Now, counties' efforts aren't going to match the hundreds of millions of dollars that the state is capable of and has been contributing, but it's important for counties to take that into consideration. My understanding, Brad, you might maybe you can answer that question for folks. I think that's my understanding of. There have been some significant purchases in that Big Cypress Calusa area with that direct funding from 2 years ago. So there's money that's been spent, some significant purchases in Collier County for that. There's still money available, and I have heard that up in the O2O section, where there was also another direct funding line. There's been an expansion of where that money could be spent, but that money was still available for those areas, despite some conversation about their potentially being redirected to other needs. And Brad, you might be able to fill in any holes in that. I'd love to hear from you or others on the group that might have.
By the way, Brad Cornell is the Audubon, Florida, I think, policy associate for Southwest Florida. Brad, if you want to come on, we welcome to, if you want to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Scott and Jason. Yeah, I genuinely don't know the current status. About 30,000 acres in the Big Cypress to Caloosahatchee area has been purchased by DEP. There was significantly more money available from the appropriation 2 years ago, and the House had was looking at perhaps clawing back some of that. I don't know if that's actually come to pass in the budget negotiations that are on right now. And as we know, legislative session has been extended to June 6th, so we kind of don't
Yeah.
know the end of the story. I didn't know if you guys had any more information.
I know that it's not a signed and done deal to retain it, but I'm still optimistic that it will be retained. I don't think the clawback effort is going to prevail, but it's not over. There's still some concern. And was there another part to that question,
So,
Scott?
do you guys do
Oh,
acquisitions
we
yourself?
we really don't. We do have a critical linkage fund, which is a small pool of money that we will go and help in areas of the corridor that land trusts typically don't operate in. There are so many great land trusts throughout the state that work on uh, land acquisitions, but there are some places like in Collier County, there's Conservation Collier, and there's an area in Conservation Collier's footprint that are a bunch of small lots. These are some of the hardest places to conserve because you can purchase a 4,000 acre property or a 4 acre property, and it takes the same amount of effort oftentimes to get those two things done. And uh, Conservation Collier has been chipping away at some of these small lots in this area called the Panther Walk, and we've been helping them in that with this little bit of money, just trying to keep that program going in a sensitive area. But we are not a land trust. We don't hold the land. There are lots of wonderful places that do that.
Thank you. Linda Jansen asks, wonderful presentation. Do you ever give presentations at Florida communities? I guess she wants to educate her community.
Yeah, I do some. We have a great stable of speakers at the Corridor Foundation, and we several of us do. So if there's an interest, by all means, make the inquiry, and we can see if we can
And
fix you up.
we put the information in the chat on the
Yeah,
website for the foundation, so I'm sure they can contact you guys through there.
great.
In what ways can we volunteer to help? And both Kristen and Tyra gave some answers. We have a volunteer program. You could reach out
Ah,
to Kaylin Lawson at Kaylin at FloridaWildlifeCorridor.org. And Tyra said, I just signed up to volunteer for the Florida Connect conference.
oh,
So
fantastic.
that's great. That's great.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We
But
have we have some internships as well that we occasionally do, and I
yeah.
I I got introduced to Florida's great wild places through an internship. So volunteering and interning, yeah, we love that. That's great.
You mentioned you started with a Corkscrew in 1991, which is
1990, yes.
1990.
Yeah.
Wow,
Oh
wow,
yeah.
way back.
19 years old. Yeah. Just
Yeah, that's great.
have fun.
Tyra also asked, what are the biggest tax incentives for developers? Are there tweaks that we could advocate for great question, to encourage sustainable, smart development?
Yeah. So there's something that we've been working on with a group for a couple of years. It's called Corridor Compatible Community Guidelines. And these aren't monetary incentives, but there are a number of developers that have made some efforts to create a kind of community that has uh, less impact on the environment, planting plans that involve natives and xeriscaping, and plans that accommodate the natural landscape, the wetlands, and some of the scrub habitats, and try to avoid things. And so we've been working with some folks to try to develop some guidelines that could help them understand what the needs are for the corridor. Those guidelines are going to be in beta form and published at our summit, and they'll be available on our website. So after June 3rd, you'll be able to get a hold of those. We're going to be piloting that in a scoring approach with a development in the state, and we're hoping to maybe pilot it with 3 in the next year, and possibly that will be something that can be a benefit to just how the state grows. So I don't know if that's exactly the answer you're hoping for, but that's what we've been working on.
Elena Stemi also asks, are there any children's books about the corridor or similar issues that you recommend?
Oh, what there was a book by her name's just escaped me. If I think about it, I'll drop it in the chat or I'll say it while I'm still on. But we do have an activity book that I think, Ethan, maybe if you're still there, you can let us know if that's available for sale. I know we have a limited number of those, but we could send a few over and you guys can take a look at that. And the same person that wrote the Poisonwood Bible, her name's escaping me.
Poisonwood Bible, Mary, remember? No, yeah, I which I read, but I can't remember her name.
She wrote a wonderful children's book.
Okay.
Yeah, Barbara Kingsolver. Thank you.
Great.
And so that's one. It's not necessarily about the corridor, but it's a children's book about conservation, and it's beautiful. I think we could use some more about the corridor.
Lena Stemi also says, sounds like in some counties in Florida is up to the cities if they want to annex land that was agriculture to be developed. Attending commission meetings at county and city levels could help.
I lost audio for a second there. Was it the agricultural enclaves?
So Lena Stemi says, sounds like in some communities in Florida, it is up to the cities if they want to annex land that was agriculture to be developed. Attending commission meetings at county and city levels could help.
Oh yes, yeah, that local involvement is really important. And there was an ag enclave bill that bounced around for a while, and that had the potential to make it easier to develop at the margins of urban areas. And those are where that intersects the corridor. That would make it really harder to protect, harder to keep up with those things. So it's hard to anticipate, but yes, that's where local involvement is so important. Staying involved in, and you can, by the way, you can find the Florida Wildlife Corridor viewer if you type in FEGN viewer into your Google search, or Florida Wildlife Corridor viewer. It'll take you to Center for Landscape Conservation Planning tool that you can type in your address or any address you're interested in, and you can see where it is in relation to the corridor. It's got layers you can turn off and on. It's one of the more user-friendly of the wildlife viewers that has some power to do some exploration. And I would encourage you to just, if you're interested, get familiar with that in your area so that you can see how planning and growth that's going on in your community might impact the corridor. That'd be a wonderful local action.
And Jason, is that available on your website?
We probably have that link on our webpage. I know we have it. We also have a Corridor Connect platform, which is you have to register to be a part of it, but we're building a toolbox that can be open to the public, and that link is not ready yet. But we're gonna compile all the tools that we use in our Mind the Gaps workshop and make them available to the public. So that part's not ready yet, but we'll let you know.
Okay. I know how much pressure there is on agricultural land for development. I know in our own county, we have an area called the Agricultural Reserve, and the pressure to develop properties in that area is nonstop. I mean, the developers just keep wanting to cut little pieces away from that preserve, and they've been, the county commission has been allowing them to alter the plans, and so we've been losing acreage. George Glenn asked, DEP is still purchasing expensive properties near the 14 connection that disappeared. Do you believe that DEP, FDACS are purchasing the best available properties, both from an ecological standpoint, it's very specific, and a wildlife corridor perspective, or are some purchases being driven by other less desirable factors?
Well, first, I can say that since it's a willing seller program, it's just looking at the universe of properties that are within those There's an effort in Florida Forever to have a transparent ranking system and to have the ARC committee rank those. And I think they do a pretty good job. I'm less familiar with how FDAX has been going through and ranking. They have the same tools and criteria available to them. Tom Hochter from UF and others, Reed Noss and Dan Smith, have provided a bunch of data tools and metrics for them to use in the ranking. And my understanding is that they do that, but there are urgent places within the corridor that don't fit those programs' profiles. They're looking at large contiguous tracts that score high with biodiversity and water quality and these kinds of things. And those are great to get. It's hard to not purchase one of those large contiguous intact ranches or forest tracts. But some of the places that have the urgency and vulnerability just don't look like the next state park or state forest. And they're never going to score high enough on an ARC review to merit spending. So we need to come up with other solutions to secure those critical gaps, and Florida Community Trust funding would help. That's one way we can start to work on that. We've shared the model of the corridor with mitigation banks, and we've seen mitigation banks then use that to locate where their banks are, and they can take an area that's too degraded to attract a high Florida Forever FDAC score, and they can turn that gap into lift, and they can mitigate in a way that builds up the value of it. So there's a few comments on that. Anyway.
I'm just wondering, when you have properties that you're that are a higher priority and you don't really quite have the funds to purchase them, or there isn't one of the trusts doesn't have the funds to purchase them, do you ever try to encourage those property owners to perhaps put conservation easements on the property? Or because I know there are at least tax incentives for those.
Yeah, we do. There's conservation easements. There's payment for ecosystem services programs, which I was really excited to see the level of interest in the Panther PES, payment for ecosystem services program that was just launched. I believe 69 applicants put in for that, and they're only going to have enough funding for maybe 15 or 20. So there's a lot of interest, and those are people that might not be ready to go to a full in perpetuity easement, but if they're willing to do a PES program, that opens the door for a relationship. And so we're hoping to continue with that lever and get more people to sign up for conservation easements and a simple acquisition.
That's great. Ethan Coyle says, commenting on the children's books, we do have a Florida Wildlife Corridor Kids Activity book, but right now it is only for sale at our office and gallery in St. Pete, so I guess you can't order it, or at the different events we attend in person. I do attend, and I know I table at some of our local events, which are, we have a large county. We have 1.6 million people in Palm Beach County, and a number of our festivals, particularly during the late fall, the winter festivals really attract anywhere, some of them over between 5,000 and 10,000 people. So I encourage you guys to come to one of our local events and table there and share these wonderful activity books and the information about the corridor with Palm Beach County residents.
Yeah, great suggestion.
Do you work with Alachua Conservation Trust?
Yeah, they're fantastic. Alachua Conservation Trust has been a great partner. We love that team. Yeah, they've been doing really good work.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Putnam group and the Putnam County.
Oh yeah,
they're a great group also.
Yep.
We're Owen Wiley, who has land in Alachua, says we're giving our 60-acre intact forest south of GNV to the ACT. I hope it.
Fantastic.
We hope so. Yeah, and Wiley is really quite a conservationist, and she's done so much for our local in our local area as well. Kristen said that's amazing. Thank you, Ann. Every acre helps. Question. So how receptive are developers when you ask because you mentioned that you approach developers who have land that they're looking to, that when they're going to develop within the corridor, how receptive are they to maintaining the connectivity within the corridor when you approach them? Is it a tough sell?
Um, things are improving in that regards. There's not every developer has the same business model. There are some, I'm sure that you're aware, that go for density and develop every acre that they can. And then there are others that look for a 60% open space, green space is fine with them. And they're open to asking us, how can we configure our green space to not do undue damage to the corridor? And so those things do happen. There are some developers that think they've done a phenomenal job of designing their green space, and it's little postage stamps that aren't connected. So in those moments, you hope, well, maybe this is the start of a conversation. And I have to say, Brad Cornell does this beautifully at his role at Audubon, and I've loved working with Brad over the years to talk to developers and try to get them to work on developments. And you can have a really good success with one conversation, but if that same template is applied to another project, it might not fit because there are local landscape conditions that are different. And creating a panther corridor that will be used and useful isn't as easy as just saying make it this wide. You have to really take in other things into consideration. But yeah, Brad's been really fun. I missed that, Brad.
That's great. One last question that I have, and I don't see any other questions in our chat. The 8 million unprotected acres in the Florida corridor that you mentioned earlier, what can we, the public, what can, small, chapters like ourselves do to help in their preservation?
Yeah. Being involved locally with what's happening in the county with planning and zoning, annexation decisions, if you can weigh in for that. If there are opportunities to encourage land acquisition funds through referendums to be made available, that's always wonderful. Introducing people to conservation and getting people involved and getting them to care at a very beginner level matters. So just continuing to share our enthusiasm for these wild places is going to help. Some of the concrete and intangible things, be vocal. Talk about Florida Forever and rural family land funding, and make sure you're voting conservation as well. That's great. And there are some really good films that focus on conservation, the corridor. If you want a full-length film and you haven't seen The Path of the Panther, you should watch The Path of the Panther. There's a film called The Hidden Wild that Alex Freeze and some others produced. We have a number of films on our website. If you wanted to have a film screening and share that and circulate that, those are ways to kind of get community together and just being involved like you are in your local backyard and being aware of the tools and resources like the FEGN and Florida Wildlife Corridor viewer, so that you can just get the word out. Make sure your county planners and municipal planners have that map and that they're using it. There are a number of counties that are adopting that shapefile layer in their planning process, and that are starting to work on corridor language and how they manage growth. And those are concrete local steps that are taking hold, and we just need to pick the pace up in that.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and that's great information. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for this presentation. Amazing, great information, great visuals, by the way. And I can't tell you how much I think I've learned, and I'm sure others have learned as well. about the corridor, which I think is very important for all of us to know, to be able to, if we can, contribute in some way to its continued growth, because we're all, I mean, I think most of us value wild places and the wildlife that resides there. And without the work that
Yeah.
you're doing, a lot of these places will be disappearing. So I can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing. Thank you for this wonderful presentation tonight. And yeah,
My pleasure.
yeah,
My
yeah.
pleasure.
Okay. All right. Well, everybody, let me just share my screen real quickly. And I just want to thank you for joining us this evening. It takes a great team to help bring you these virtual presentations, so thank you to all of them. And we can't wait to see you on June 1st, 2025, on the first Tuesday of the month, when we will be hosting Randy Minotor presenting on how birds created the world and other stories from the complete language of birds. And next month, we will begin the meeting with our annual members meeting. So if you are not currently a chapter friend of Audubon Everglades, you may wish to delay signing on until approximately 7:15 p.m. when we will get started with the regular meeting. So good night. Enjoy the last 2 weeks of migration. Those birds are flying over still. And see you all next month. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Take care, everybody.